Hi, so I'm going to go ahead and review the Unit 3 lab activity, the lab kit that I did. The specific kit that I did included 3 different labs, a physics lab for heat transfer, a chemistry lab that dealt with acids and bases, and a biology lab that dealt with enzymes. So there were 3 different lab components for it. I got this kit from esciencelabs.com, which ironically enough is what, at Flint Hills Technical College, this is what is used for the entire biology distance learning lab class. They have eScience lab kits, which are awesome. So it was nice. I really enjoyed, and I know I'll say this multiple times, but I really enjoyed going through and performing these labs as I'm getting ready to set up a chemistry class, a distance learning chemistry class for Flint Hills Technical College. So was I able to repeat labs or fix errors? I think for the most part, I felt that the lab could be repeated or done again because there were slightly more materials than what I needed. So if I did something wrong, I could do it again. I could clean all of the equipment. It was very, simple and easy to wash to redo it again. And there were extras of a lot of things. Or some of the materials that were consumable, I could go to the grocery store and replace. Like I could go buy grape juice or I could go buy orange juice to replace them. I even had to supply some of the consumables, some of the food products that I was burning and using during the heat transfer lab. So as long as nothing is spilled, like any of the major chemicals, as long as you didn't spill it and ruin all of it, then yeah, there was enough to allow you to do this lab over again. I will say it did take a long time. I mean, what I perceived it as a long time to complete the 2 labs. It took me about 2 hours. Most of that was setting stuff up and just getting stuff organized, but there's also parts to where you have to set up a hot water bath or you have to let a paper towel dry. You spray it with stuff and then you have to let it dry before you go back and do the analysis. So it took me about 2, maybe 2.5 hours to complete the lab. If I was a student, each lab would probably take 2 hours, which is realistic when you think about how long you would spend in a lab class. Most lab classes are 3 hours, so you might do 3 hours 2 times a week. So that's going to be 6 hours. And in that time, you could probably complete 3 of these labs. So the time commitment is big, but it's also realistic in comparison to what an actual lab class would be. And it also takes time, to stop and upload pictures and take pictures of stuff that you might turn into your instructors. So it is going to take a good chunk of time, but it's replacing a lab that does take a long time. So it's realistic. The format I really liked. The general format for labs was very easy to read and easy to follow. I love the check boxes on the lab because then you know exactly where you are and what you've done and you just check it off as you go through. And it actually makes it easier to read from a student perspective because you know which steps you're supposed to do and which ones you aren't. Like it just identifies it as this is the procedure. There are pre-lab questions and then there's post-lab analysis questions. There's data tables already set up within the lab, so it makes it really nice. It tells you what to record. You know what you need to keep track of. One of the biggest things would be, as an instructor, I would stress to the students that they need to at least glance through the lab to see what extra materials they need, how long different parts of the lab are expected to take, and what charts and what data they're going to be collecting, so that way they're not just coming upon it and going, oops, I forgot to collect something. A lot of the pre-lab stuff, like one of the labs, the acids and bases, had me do a pre-lab session. That was an animation. It was a simulation that I had to go through and add acids and bases together and use indicators. And I can understand them wanting to do that because some of those aren't very safe. You wouldn't want to package some of that stuff and have it potentially spill, or some of those chemicals can be a little hazardous if somebody doesn't dispose of them correctly or doesn't know what they're doing. So that was nice to go back to and do. There was a little bit of an online component to it, but all the other stuff, it was easy to the stuff was downloadable and they were editable. They were just Word documents with all the charts, tables, and graphs, and then the post-assessment questions that were provided. So here's kind of a picture of the pre-lab questions for the enzyme lab. I just did one of the labs, or took pictures of one of the labs. And then here are the procedure steps. And I love this. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but the experiment demo so you can actually see what's going on. And then here was a table that it told you what you were going to be collecting and what materials you were going to need. So the lab kit versus the on-campus lab, those 3 labs were awesome. They provided a great experience at completing the lab rather than actually being in the lab class. The only difference is that if you do have an immediate question, there is nobody to answer that question immediately. So then you might turn to Google or you might turn to YouTube, which is fine, you know, to try to get some other knowledge or resources. But I think for me, if I were to do this, I would have some sort of a discussion forum set up so that the students could ask each other questions, but they could also ask me questions that were related to the lab. So when I got a notification that there was a post in that, I would know to check that immediately so that I could help a student out as quickly as I got that notification. Or, you know, with other students, they could set up their notifications to have them be turned on, that if somebody posts in this specific forum, they're aware of it so that they can help each other out. The labs, like I said earlier, will take about 2 hours to complete for each one of them. And that's realistic for the time commitment of an actual lab class. To earn that credit, you are in the lab for 2 to 3 hours, sometimes more than that per week. So the students are able to look up the experimental procedures throughout the website. If there's some help that you need, if you need help with a setup, there's all sorts of little demos and stuff that you can click on that are linked to visuals or videos or other diagrams. But there's also diagrams and images throughout the lab that are available to help so that you know that your setup looks exactly like this. The instructions are in color, so it's easier to visualize it if it's in color instead of a gray scale of black and white. You're not losing anything. I like that it did include all the safety materials. There was plenty of gloves, there were table covers, glasses, all that material is given to you, and it is prompted when to use this material or when to put it on when you're doing the lab. So like I said, there's links to animations and tutorials. And then all of the safety information is provided. So should something happen, all of the safety information is provided very easily. So right here is the experiment demo. And this was awesome because it actually showed a person setting this lab up so that you could see what yours was supposed to look like, which is great for that visual part of learning. Here's a picture of all the safety material. So the glasses, some table covers, and in here was the paper towel for one of the labs that I need, for the enzyme lab that I needed, and some extra pairs of gloves. Here's a picture of just what it's supposed to look like. I have this in black and white because I printed it out, but it was in color on the original online, so that you could see what the setup was supposed to look like. Technical issues, really I didn't have any technical issues, but I can see some students having issues coming up with some of the extra lab materials, like they might not know specifically how much they need or what it is specifically that they need, or forget in advance that I need to do this. So it does require some planning on behalf of the student. The student has to look up those materials. You're not just going to be able to sit down and complete the lab if you haven't read through it or looked through it to see, oh, I need to set up a water bath or a hot water bath that I have to get to this temperature before I start the lab, or I have to go and get these materials. They've got to have everything on hand before they start it. And that's where, for me as an instructor, I would provide a warning to the students about that. I would say, make sure you check your procedure, or make sure you get these materials before you start lab number 3, or hey, heads up, these are the extra materials that you're going to need to perform lab number 3. So that way the students aren't coming in blindsided. I really had no other material or technical issues at all while performing these labs. I know what everything is, and my students, I think, could very easily figure out what everything is. Everything was labeled very clearly, and if it wasn't labeled, there were pictures that showed you what a test tube was, or what the beakers were, what a graduated cylinder was. There's a materials list that's part of the online resources, so if you wanted to know what that stuff was, you could find it out. The student would have to do a little bit of digging, but they could find it. So the assessment portion that I would do for this lab, Let me go back to this really quick. So the assessment, I would have the students take pictures of everything, but not only take pictures. I want them to take pictures of the kit when they get it. I want them to take pictures of the lab at specific points as they're going through it. I would say take a picture of like your paper towel, take a picture of this, take a picture of that as you're going through it, and then upload all those images so that I could see what their results were. So for example, the student can send a picture of their paper towel, or they can send a picture of your pH test strips, or your final setup for the heat transfer lab. So there's lots of different things that you could have the students take pictures of. But then to assess their overall knowledge, instead of having them, which I would have them upload their finished document, but instead of only doing that, I want them to upload a video of them explaining the analysis questions or some other questions that I would pose. I want you to video yourself explaining this to me, doing the analysis and conclusion. Like, what was the purpose of this lab? What did you learn from this lab? And maybe some, just answering some basic objectives about it. And almost like a little video quiz format so that I could make sure that each student got what they were supposed to be getting from the lab. So not only would I have the pictures, I would also have the uploaded lab and some sort of a video. And then the students could answer, discussion questions or forum questions to help them communicate with each other. So that way there's the communication that, oh, hey, I missed this, or I didn't get that. But one thing I would do, and this would not make me a very nice instructor, but this is something that I would do, I would set up the discussion board posts to be private so that the student could not see other responses until they responded. So I would have it set up that they couldn't see what other students wrote or other analysis and other conclusions, so that way they wouldn't copy it. I would also do it that they couldn't edit their responses. They can always go back and put a reply in and explain, oh, well, after reading the other responses, I realized I came to the wrong conclusion, or I didn't understand what was going on. But I want to see their initial post and see what they initially came up with. And if they get it wrong, it's okay. It's not like it's going to hurt them. What I want them to do is to learn from that and to see what they should have gotten from the lab if they didn't get the correct analysis. So that way there's a learning process, and I can also see their thought process as they go through the materials. A little bit of a reflection. I absolutely loved this kit. Like, I loved everything about these 3 labs, and it makes me really excited to set up some sort of an online distance learning chemistry class where I can really have the kids do the lab because of just the simplicity of the eScience materials. So the equipment and materials in these kits are easy to use, they're organized, they're clean, it's awesome. So students can have the lab experience easily and safely at home, and they don't have to worry about being in a physical lab to do some of this stuff. I think the best part for me is that it does encourage the individual to donate their equipment to a school or a nonprofit organization, like some sort of maybe a church group that's having a science camp, or a school or an elementary school that might not have a whole bunch of science materials. You can donate your stuff to it, and then the students at any age level can use it. So it encourages science exploration. So you just pass on your materials to somebody else so that they can experiment with it instead of throwing them away. So I think that was awesome that they do encourage that. And all 3 of these labs would be labs that I could do in my high school classes, but also in my college classes. So the acids and bases lab I could do in biology, chemistry, or honors chemistry. The enzyme lab I could do in chemistry to show chemical reactions, but I think it would fit better in a biology unit, in the cells unit. And then the heat transfer lab we could use in our energy unit in chemistry. We could use it in physical science. We could also use it in biology, as we are doing some specific heat and calculating heat transfer, but it fits more in chemistry and physical science or physics. So all 3 of these labs are very applicable to units that I teach, or they're labs that are similar to labs I'm already doing. We already do an enzyme lab. I know they do an enzyme lab in biology. We already do acids and base labs. We already do a heat transfer lab. So they could easily take the place of that, or they would fit right in. So, and then here's my standards. But as I said, I really enjoyed doing these 3 labs.